Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about Chapter 2 in Ravenswatch. I'm joined by Frebr33ze and Positive4ce. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yo!
How's it going?
And we just have a few talking points here. We're going to just discuss some general stuff about Chapter 2. So, right off the top of the list, we wanted to talk about perhaps the most pressing issue amongst players that we have all seen, and that is birds.
Birds, my beloved.
Birds. You know, when I think about you, when you said we're going to be talking about Chapter 2, I was like, that's kind of wrong. We're just talking about birds, aren't we?
This is the bird balance patch. You know, we just like to talk about birds. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah. Storm Island, more like Bird Island.
It really is. We talked about this a little bit before. There was two major issues that we feel like with birds, right? There's they kind of just spawn from wherever. You know, you're walking, you think you could sneak some crystals or a healing fountain or something. Nope, bird. And then the other one was the infinite spawning birds, which is a bit more comical.
I'll take more Stars of Fate, though, because it's worth a bit of... What the fuck? What? What? The fucking posse rolled up? What is this? Are you serious right now? I've never seen anything like that in this game before. What the hell was that? Yeah.
So it's a bit more a bit more forgiving because of the comical aspect of it. I really don't like the fact that the birds aren't on the map. There isn't a visual thing to tell if you are going to be ambushed by a bird or not, or like you spawn into a Grimoire and there's just a bird off screen that's like taking his sweet time to fly into that Grimoire.
Yep.
That one is particularly strange, I think.
And there's also the issue of when you leave an area, like let's say you leave a well and come back later to purchase from the well, but when you initially left, you would aggro some birds. And so even if you aren't close to the place where you aggro those birds, when you teleport back in, all of a sudden they have aggro, and they take... You're not sure where exactly it's from, so they take a good like 30 seconds to find their way over to you. And you just felt like you wasted so much time because you couldn't drop the aggro. You had to wait for them to come to you so you could kill them. And it's just very unfortunate. With that one in particular is the most upsetting to me. When they come down from above, I'm just like, all right, you win. I'm out of here. Goodbye. But when they randomly aggro from 10 screens away and make their way over to me, that's the worst, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add. I think my feelings on birds are pretty well known. There's some issues there. I think that the aggro mechanics of Ravenswatch are already fairly punishing, and it takes a while to get comfortable with that aspect of the game. And birds kind of abuse the worst parts of the aggro system at the moment. I think that they're simply the worst offender. There's some strange things that happen in Chapter 1 sometimes with spiders that spawn, and aggro as well. But the spiders aren't quite as problematic because you can see them on the map, and because they're not like a regular enemy, right? They come off of the nightmare spider monsters, or off of trees, so they're a little bit... There's less of them in the game. They're going to be fewer aggro problems. The aggro problems with little birds can just really affect your ability to get around the map. You end up just standing in place sometimes and having to wait for things that are off your screen to resolve themselves, to figure themselves out. So in general, I think that they create a suboptimal player experience. They're weird to play around. I just would love to see birds in a little bit more of a consistent state so that we don't see these behaviors. And then, of course, the infinite spawning bug is just... It's pure cinema, man. It happens on streams, it happens on recordings, and those are some of the wackiest things ever. You know, you'll be like fighting a normal fight in a camp, and then 100 birds will march south on your screen. And it used to make me more angry. And at this point, it's like I'm not even quite as angry anymore. I'm just like, wow, this is something else. It's unnatural. It's like watching, you know, the ocean come in, or seeing looking down a mountain and seeing a beautiful scene out in front of you. It's almost majestic in a way. I still want it to go away, but there's a sublime power to it that I didn't appreciate when I first saw it.
I think for me, there is one time where I really, really love seeing it, and it's when I'm playing Beowulf Explosive Fire, because I'm like, this
Oh
is going to
yeah.
be the prettiest screen I've ever seen in my life. So I play for those moments. I yearn for the birds with Explosive Fire. Well, actually, real quick, Fabrice, you had mentioned one thing the other time we talked, and you had said you think uh, birds should cast a shadow on the map. And I really, really like that idea. I hope that's a thing that is considered at some point on a solution so that you have a little bit more of an idea. You can like pay attention and see, can I walk this way? Am I going to path into birds? Or you have an idea of how many birds are on the map in a given camp or something. So
Yeah.
you know they're going to continue spawning down. I really like that idea.
Yeah, actually, thanks for reminding me. I think it'd also be cool. Like, imagine if they cast a shadow and they kind of patrol. So,
Yep.
there's plenty of games where that you'll have like spotlights in a prison escape or something. You have to stay out of the spotlight. I think it'd be cool if Storm Island had that with birds, right? That you just have these shadows patrolling, and if you get too close to a shadow, the bird aggroes. But it's like a broader patrol than most enemies, because most enemies in the game they don't have much patrolling. They patrol a little bit. If you had like these broad patrols by birds that cast a shadow, it's very telegraphed. People can avoid it, but it's not something you can always avoid, right? Like you know that sometimes you're going to get caught and you'll have to fight. And I think that that would be a really nice way to incentivize stealing shards in the middle of the map, right? Still making it worthwhile to be aware of your surroundings, but also to create kind of a fun mini game or mechanic that people can play around.
Yeah, that's definitely
Yeah.
a cool solution for like an otherwise potentially frustrating kind of happenstance of the game. I will say, like, technically, if, being hypothetical about the hypothetical mechanic, would it be like they project their vision cone down onto the ground, and because their shadow, I feel like they probably wouldn't see the birds. Typically, don't look straight down.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because if I, the way I've been thinking it or envisioning it, it would be like the shadow is on the ground, kind of
Hmm.
like a buzzard outline. You're walking through the desert,
Yep.
and as it moves forward, right, as the game unfolds, you just have to stay away from that shadow. Obviously, in terms of like real world
Right.
behavior, that shadow would be in different places depending on the time of day. And so I guess that you could have like an outline kind of like you do to anticipate an enemy attack to let
Right.
you know when you're going to be in a dangerous spot. But that does feel a little bit more serious, right? There's like that's a bigger it's going to add a lot more uh, busyness to the map, and I think
Hmm.
that's a difficult thing for Ravenswatch because it's a big co-op game. You want
Yeah.
to be able to have everyone moving around, and so I guess I'm leaning towards a shadow, and then just kind of like how when you see an enemy, uh, a spawn somewhere, you kind of know to give it a certain berth to prevent aggro from kicking in.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I would envision. You see a shadow, you give it that berth, and you don't risk starting a fight.
Yeah, I will say it could be like the idea that you're having. It could be precisely the opposite of how ghosts work in Chapter One, where they're completely invisible during the daytime and then they just kind of hang out during night. It could be one of two things, honestly. It could be that they show their shadow during the daytime and then they're invisible during the night, so you have that sort of like, oh well, daytime's kind of the time to do this uh like stealth mode mini game, or they fly around during the daytime and they roost no matter what in the nighttime. So you can see the shadow during the daytime, but during nighttime they're not flying at all and they're just kind of hanging out on the ground. Similar to how ghosts work. I guess that's the exact same as how ghosts work. But then you can at least see their shadow, whereas ghosts are completely invisible, but you can kind of guess where they are sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually love that idea. That'd be really nice.
I like
Making
the
sure that all
consistency.
enemies are on the map. Yeah.
All right. Well, aside from the baby birds, the big birds, they do have some frustrations with them. I assume this list here is kind of just talking about how they just have so much in their kit with being able to spawn enemies, having the stun with the big egg, and then their AoE fan attack. Anyone want to start the discussion on that aspect.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys know, the feather that they, like the Phoenix feather that they send out, actually has 2 instances of damage.
That is
if
correct.
you get hit by it directly. Yeah, I think getting hit by one of those is probably some of like the most damage you can take in a lot of cases, besides like a big night slam and stuff in chapter 3. I think that's one of the tough things to play around. Also, the AoE factor that they have, that if you like dodge one of them near a wall, you still get hit.
Yep.
Because they have the AoE explosions. And sometimes you dodge one and you're playing co-op and someone next to you gets hit by it next to you, and now you're punished for that. I don't know how much I think that's actually a problem. I think that's like birds kind of saying skill issue to us. I think they're just one of the tougher enemies in the game, and I like that there's an enemy that tough. I don't really have a problem with big birds. They can get incredibly overwhelming if you go into a camp and there's 3 or 4 of them and maybe 2 eggs that you can't crack on time. Yep. Those camps are terrifying, but I don't really feel like I have a problem that much with the big birds.
Yeah, I do really hate that feeling when you go in. Sorry, Syphro.
No.
I hate that feeling when you go into a camp and you fail the DPS check on the egg. So you waste all that time. You probably take a little bit of damage, and then another bird hatches out. But again, I think that's more of a skill expression thing. Like you should know when you look into the camp and you look at your build, you should be able to kind of know how well you're going to do into it and whether or not you should even try to focus the egg, or maybe just wait for the camp until later.
For sure. And there have been times where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to have to come back here. I'm just going to go in there and try my best to get this egg out. I have my ulti. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to use it. And I just waste my ulti trying to kill the egg in time, but I still don't get it because I just like barely miss it. Like if I had Vorpal Blade, I would have killed it, Yeah. And sometimes it's just kind of like stubbornness. I am definitely stubborn, but yeah, I mean, I like the Phoenixes a lot, especially because they kind of function to me like how the gargoyles function in chapter 3, where instead of money that you get from them, you just get XP. I call it free XP all the time whenever you're strong enough to pop an egg before it can hatch. I won't use an ulti outside of a camp to get the XP from a Phoenix egg, whereas I will do that for money in chapter 3, like a Melusine bubble ult. I'll just use it on like a group of 3 gargoyles. Why not? But if I can go into a camp and take out a couple eggs beforehand, that's always nice, obviously. And I think the Phoenixes have been the enemy that especially in chapter 2, the enemy that I feel like has some of the most skill expression in terms of finding a way to deal with them. I do think their egg drop ability is kind of annoying, especially because they become untargetable before they even lift off the ground. It's like, this guy's just getting a million iframes real quick here. But other than that, I do like pretty much everything about them. And I think the egg is pretty easy to dodge anyways, unless you like queue up an ability right before it shows up. So, but I feel like it's so telegraphed that it's really hard to do that in most situations.
Yeah, there's a clip somewhere of me where that I get hit by an egg and then I get hit by another egg immediately, and it's one of the few abilities enemies have that can be spammed. And since as far as I know, creeps aren't actually timing those things actively to try to CC you, it doesn't happen very often, but it is funny when it does. And the initial hit is completely on you. You have a lot of opportunities to play around it once you understand the Phoenix's moveset.
Yeah. I could like the egg cracking minigame a little bit, because there's definitely been times where, the greed has gotten to me and I'm standing there like, no, keep doing damage as I'm impaled by like 7 birds.
Yep.
And then I break the egg and I'm like, great, now I have 1 health. Perfect.
Worth it.
Yeah. And it always does feel worth it. If you break the egg, it always feels worth it. If you don't, then you're like, I threw the run.
Yeah.
Completely through.
Yeah. Yeah, your mental game is shot immediately.
Yeah, that's where they win, They're like, you might have broke the egg, but your mental is completely broken. You want to go on to the crabs?
Yeah, let's do crabs. With their change going from always having golden armor when they're standing upright to either with the regular crabs losing their armor completely or being like the elite crabs who do they get double armor or just a single? I think it's double armor. Is that right? No, I think it's actually
Yeah.
single armor.
Yeah, so the regular crabs, if you stun them, then they don't have any armor. And then the boss or the bigger crabs, when they, not the boss technically, the top
Yeah.
boss is different. It always is 100%. But the elite crabs, they get 50%. Yeah, so the first degree of armor.
Gotcha. Yep. So yeah, I personally really like this change. People will say otherwise, but I personally didn't have that much of an issue with the crabs before. I do think that them having a lot of armor when they flip back over is kind of annoying. There's multiple ways that you could solve an issue like that, like making it easier for them to get staggered, for example. But I think the solution that they came up with like letting you just knock as many as you want over, and then you can deal with their regular health bars, regular non-armored health bars afterwards, which is typically how I tackle a crab camp. I'll just try to knock over as many as possible with whatever AoE I have, and then just go through them like they're regular enemies with no armor. Except for the elites. I avoid that with the elites because they get so much armor back, but they're an enemy that's in a good spot now, whereas I didn't think they were necessarily in a bad spot before, but I know that they definitely had their issues with some people.
I think the thing with crabs that's really interesting is if you look at old crabs, it fell disproportionately on some characters because some characters have a ton of CC in their kits, your Melusines, and then some characters just didn't have a way to stun them. And Ace and I've talked about this. Carmilla really doesn't have a lot of CC in her base kit in terms of her attack and stuff, and so old crabs would have probably been really, really hard for her. And I think that one of the places where old crabs was really tricky was, say you're taking Grimoires and you got the crab spawn in. It can be pretty hard. Of all the enemies that you can get in chapter 2, getting a bunch of old crabs was one of the hardest to get done in the Grimoire time window to complete it. One of the hardest enemies to finish up. I definitely think it had counterplay even then, but I think if you think of the time investment per camp, this brings them closer to Gen camps and bird camps. So I like the change, or null camps as well.
Yeah, especially because they don't teleport incessantly like the like the Jins do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Carmilla, if you think about her abilities that can help flip crabs, it's her ultimate, it's gust, and it is her power. And again, her power is a long cooldown. If you use it in a poor timing, you have to wait a long time to get it back. And you got to be stagnant to use it. So if crabs got their full armor back and you're playing Carmilla, crabs would be a camp that you would probably need to wait until level 7 or level 8 until your build can just destroy them instantly when you flip them. So I really like that they made this change because I think Carmilla would have been a very unenjoyable character like right when she released if that change wasn't made at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, she quickly shot up to like one of my favorite characters when she was released. So, and that's saying a lot coming from me as a person who has like in this game at least, and in a lot of other roguelites I will say, but in this game, a lot of anti-melee bias. Like I like Sun Wukong and I like Carmilla, and I guess I've kind of been growing on Aladdin a little bit, but that's about it for melee. In terms of, I don't dislike the other ones, but it's just like, I really like the ranged characters a lot more, like Melusine, Pied Piper, and Snow Queen.
I hear some Scarlet disrespect in your tone, sir.
Scarlet, when I started doing the challenge runs,
yeah. Do you love wolf form? Wolf form is all.
So I actually am a wolf form enjoyer. Like before, I think it was before they released the modifiers at all. I did challenges with transform where I did like as soon as the run starts, choose transform, and then I did a human mode, and I did one where I just pressed Q right away and transform into wolf and just stayed in that form for the whole run. way back before I think Chapter 3 was released or something like that. And I thought the wolf form like version of that challenge was way easier personally. But I will say in a lot of other games where I mentioned my anti-melee bias, I have always been more of like a bruiser player than an assassin player, which I think is pretty much how you can boil down the dichotomy of Scarlet versus wolf form, or human form versus wolf form. So I think that's kind of why wolf form appeals more to me. But I will say, in Chapter 3 is kind of hard to be a bruiser as Scarlet. That's kind of where I die the most in wolf form, is in Chapter 3. Whereas in human form, I feel like it's usually like that one gets me a lot in Chapter 1. So it's kind of like it's a mirrored or like a reversed scaling situation where I kind of prefer human form later in the game and I kind of prefer wolf form earlier in the game. And I don't know why that is necessarily. Like
Yeah,
specifically.
we could write books on that. That's actually really interesting because I think Ace kind of leans the other way, right? Like you like wolf later.
Yeah, I think wolf for me, once I have enough skills to cover the my personal like downsides with wolf, I think wolf is normally outpowers Scarlet for me in a lot of instances late game. But early game, oh god.
We could talk about the Chapter 3 specifics later, but the wolves in Chapter 3, I don't know what it is about them. If I just haven't internalized their animations, specifically the small wolves, but they get me a lot, and they frustrate me to no end.
Yeah, they are tough on melee characters. They're pretty brutal. Like
Yeah.
the trap feature that they have is really punishing.
What's really weird, and I mean we can get into this, but there's actually two different kinds of little wolf, and I thought that there was just one type of little wolf, and then the alpha wolves, but there's two types of little wolf, and they have different animations. So one of them has a trap, and one of them has a swipe, I think. So
Okay.
that's So if you look it up in the wiki, they are filed in separate categories since they're different things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just saw it recently, and I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. I guess I should start paying attention and trying to see if I can pick out the difference in the models next time I'm in Chapter 3.
Yeah. All right. Well, kind of derailed there, but we were just talking about crabs for the most part. Do we want to jump to the crab mini boss?
Sure, yeah. I think that introducing the curtains to that approach that block progression until you finish speeding the enemies leading up to them. Similar to what we talked about in Chapter 1, it extends the fight. It forces you to have more fights going in. And I don't love that. I don't love that you fight outside of the camp and then inside the camp. And Chapter 2 is particularly punishing because you have two fights before you even get to the crab mini boss. And it's already such a high investment to go to that, to find the key, to go there, to have those fights before you're even facing the mini boss. I think that you generally are going to be better served to just pick up little camps and go around the map and then only think about the side quest and about the crab mini boss once you have scaled your character all the way to the max. And
Yep.
I don't love that. I kind of want it to be more accessible earlier on because I think those items are some of the most interesting things in the game.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to have a threshold, right? To have a difficulty to get into those camps to prevent people from just, min-maxing, taking those really early. But I think it's excessive.
I agree. At least for Chapter 2. I think Chapter 1, it did quickly change from having the Banshee or I always call her Karen because her name is like White Lady or something like that, but it's not Karen. The Banshee has quickly become my favorite between the two of the Chapter 1 mini bosses, whereas the Ghoul is like, oh, I guess if I have to, I'll do it, Mostly because of that curtain, and I guess, like, functionally, it's probably the same. At least with the Banshee, you can get in there without trying to fight anyone, but with the ghouls, you have to fight the ones out front, the ones in the cave, and then the Mother Ghoul herself, whereas with the Banshee, you just have that little intermediate spawn phase with all the little dudes. But you can actually even avoid that if you're able to kill her fast enough once she's knocked down, which is a little rare. It's kind of hard to do, but if you're strong enough, you can definitely do it, which is nice that there's that option, that like skill expression / power level option. But regardless, in chapter 2, I just don't like, personally, I would not have too much of an issue having to fight all the crabs with certain characters. I think with, like we mentioned before, Carmilla and her stagger, getting through all those crabs, like literally probably 12 to 18 crabs, depending on where on the minimap that side quest spawns, plus whatever enemies you might drag in. Because if that mini boss is in a red area, you're probably looking at like purple djinns and healers and other cultists coming in as well. And you have to deal with all that. If you try to de-aggro, there's probably stuff on the other side. It's very hard to de-aggro in that camp because in the red areas of the map, it's very populated. And then going through all that, going through the first kind of group, and then the second group. And then also, you get to the boss, and it's like, oh, not only does this guy take forever to stagger, but then he also flips back over very quickly. So your window to deal damage is very, very, very small. I think the smallest of any damage phase in the game. So in the fact that they introduced this mechanic where the regular crabs lose their armor entirely when they get knocked over, and then also when they come back, and then the elite crabs, they lose all but one of their armors. I think it would make a lot of sense to give the crab mini boss a 2 armor instead of going back to gold after the first time you knock him over. But that's kind of just a solution that I've thought of, not necessarily the only thing that they could do to sort of fix this overcorrection, is what I would call it, for the chapter 2 mini boss.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to do something about these barriers in the future, but something that we're also getting, I don't know when, but probably somewhat soon, is they've announced that they're adding another boss to both chapter 2 and chapter 3, and it's going to be like a purple djinn leader. And looking at the YouTube video they released and the map around this boss, it looks like it's going to function similar to the Banshee, where it's not a cave, it's just new map location, and it has a teleporter in it. So there's just, I guess, a little bit of a solution, makes it a little bit similar to chapter 1, depending on what boss you get. You might have one where you don't have to go through this whole ordeal to fight the boss. In chapter 3, it looks like it's going to be similar to what we have with the crab and the ghoul mini boss, where you're going to have this location that you go in and it's its own separate thing. But I think one of the tough things, again, if crab mini boss stays the way it is, the Banshee and Ghoul one doesn't feel as bad because you can kind of take the ghouls on. They're a lot easier to take on. You're spending probably half the time you will fighting all the crabs as you would with the ghouls. But it's really going to incentivize, or your runs are going to be a little bit more RNG based if the crabs stay how they are now, versus getting a djinn that you don't have to fight anything. You just need to get the teleport location and you can come back whenever you feel strong enough for that fight. That's going to feel pretty RNG heavy on the runs if the crab boss still takes, potentially 4 minutes if you're trying to do it early.
One of the tricky things about designing the game is figuring out interesting ways to create variation in the player experience without having really high variation in terms of the difficulty of a map. And right now, I think that there is too much variation in terms of how difficult a camp can be. I think this is really noticeable in chapter 1. I don't have this problem as much with chapter 2. But chapter 1 has some challenges with the straw quest, for example. They can dramatically increase the challenge of a chapter. And I would hate for that to become a characteristic of each chapter. It's tricky, though, because I do want variation. I want different activities and a chance to spawn in and have a different experience. But I'm worried that we will end up with a situation similar to Straw Quest in Chapter 2, where the people are all about one particular mini boss. And the other one shows up and they immediately start to check out a little bit.
Yeah, I think a really good example of how this is done well in Ravenswatch is actually if you forget the straw quest in totality. If it was only wood and stone, I think that would be the perfect dichotomy of, well, there's this side quest which has you have to go around to different camps and get their resources, and then there's this side quest where you have to go into this little special dungeon and do its little side quest thing where you're getting the stone. I think that's like the perfect example of how like they're different for sure, but they both have their benefits, I suppose. Like, I think in general, wood is more efficient and you get more XP doing the wood quest because trees are very XP efficient. And then with stone, you can fight trees in there, but the big draw to me, and it's not like that big of a deal, but the big draw to me is that you also get a little bit of money while doing that one, which is kind of cool. So there's like a little bit of extra reward in that one. And otherwise, I think the stone is also the easiest to defend. But I think they have a really good, like, you might prefer one. I definitely prefer wood. I would, if I could get wood in 100% of my runs, I would hit that button immediately. But I like stone still, and I don't mind when I get it, and I don't feel like it's a huge difference when it comes to the difficulty of the map when I have a stone side quest compared to when I get a straw side quest, and it's like, well, I gotta like redo my whole thought structure on how to tackle this chapter.
No, I agree. I think again the idea of balancing both the crab mini boss and whatever the new mini boss is in chapter 2 to a level of maybe like slight disappointment if you have one, but not like complete, oh my god, this is going to take up too much time. My run would have been better if I had this other one. I think that is I think that's a thing that could be easy to balance, and I hope whenever we get this Nightmare Unleash update, I hope there is a change to that kind of addresses our feelings with these mini bosses.
Yeah. Do you guys remember when it was possible, rare but possible, for both mini bosses to spawn in chapter 1?
Oh yeah, I love that. That was awesome.
It was always like a special little challenge. I didn't play long enough while it was in the game for it to be like something that, because I don't think I was good enough back then to like actually try to get that every single time it showed up, where I could kill both of them and still like do decently on the map. I'd have to choose one, and back then I always chose the cave quest. But that was something that was interesting to me, where once the Altar of Heroes came in, I was a little salty. It was a little bit like when you're a kid. I don't know if you guys have this experience, but when you're a kid and your parents have another kid, so all of a sudden you're not the only child. It's a little bit like that feeling.
This common experience.
I was always I was in the middle, so I was the child stealing love.
Yeah.
So that made it easier for me. But yeah,
you are the
I feel
Altar
like
of
that could be
Heroes.
it. I am the Altar of Heroes. I brought down the skill ceiling for having a family.
Huge play.
Big dude.
Outplayed your siblings.
Exactly. Get wrecked, noobs.
Yeah, and we don't have a thing about the Altar of Heroes on this, but it does affect every single chapter. Do we want to talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, Altar of Heroes, I feel like I just don't really use it. It's not a big part of how the thing is, every time I have to buy a feather, that feels kind of cheap to me, because I came into the game at a point when it was either like you die instantly or you have a million chances. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've gotten better in that aspect. I think that the current Nightmare 3 feathers is pretty solid, but then again, I've been playing on 5 negative modifiers because of Ace's negative influence on my life and aspirations. Mm-hmm. So Altar of Heroes doesn't even do anything for me. I mean, it's kind of okay though that it occupies in a POI, because I think that getting into a snowball situation on a high negative modifier run, where you get to everything, is already rare enough that if you took out some of those POIs that are occupied by Altar of Heroes or Tumors, then I would just leave chapters with a lot more FOMO. So honestly, having a POI that I don't have to prioritize, that it's honestly probably better for my heart.
Yeah, I mainly use it with, the golden egg. You have
Yep.
extra money, dump golden egg. But also there is sometimes I like, well, especially playing with Angry Birds where you have 0 feathers. Sometimes there's a play to be made where you have low health and going and just like, okay, I have 400 dream shards. Let me do 2 of these, level up, get some health back. I like that there is, I don't know. It is kind of weird that there is just an outlet to dump money and get experience for it. But I do think the biggest thing is kind of what you were saying, is that it does take a POI out of the game, where before, we potentially could have had another chest there, or something else.
Yep.
I do think it is nice that they made the change to where we are guaranteed a wishing well, because that always felt really bad whenever you didn't have a wishing well on a map. So I like that they did that. But again, that change again also applies to, there's one less thing on the map, and we will have this change soon with there's 2 new points of interest. There's I forget what it's called, but it's the one where you can get rerolls, you can redo your build or upgrade talents.
Yep.
And then there's the blood cult, that fight.
Ritual.
But they are, blood ritual, but they're removing a tumor. And I'm really happy that they decided to go that route and not leave 2 tumors. So I'm happy that 2 new points of interest, 1 less tumor. It still might, be tough. And I think part of the reason why they actually did the locked chests is, you might have 1 less key on your map, or you might have 1 less chest on your map now. So having a locked chest that can provide 2 items is probably their solution to, we want to give them the same amount of magical objects.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, because that also leads back into our mini-boss discussion of something that I was going to ask is, now that there are these key changes coming through, do you think that will significantly affect your opinion on the Chapter 2 boss and how it currently functions?
I don't think if I found a key sooner, I don't think I'd be doing this key boss any sooner with how it currently works. Maybe with, after, playing with the genie, the new Jinn boss, and seeing what I think the damage you need to take that boss on in a reasonable amount of time, it might influence that. I could definitely see some level 6 challenges of that boss depending on the build that I have and if I think it's worth it enough. And that's the thing, there are certain things like Hungry Grass and Philosopher's Stone that benefit from you having them earlier. And with the crab boss currently, I still don't even think it's worth, in most runs, going for that at a level 6 or potentially level 7 even, if I feel like I'm going to spend 4 to 5 minutes in there just flipping crabs over and over. So having another option or another boss for that, again, might incentivize taking those earlier.
For sure. How about you, Frebr33ze?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I have too much to add there. I think we'll have to see how that shakes out with the new gen mini boss and having more keys. Yeah, I think it'll depend a lot on. I imagine that the key going into the lock chest would be a faster, like a better way to scale your character than trying to get into a mini boss fight. But we'll have to see how that fight looks. I guess. I mean, if we're talking about these fights, maybe it'd be a decent time to talk a little bit about the Cyclops.
I think we mentioned this last time, but I think he's probably the best designed boss / mini boss in the whole game. Just with his variety of attacks, and honestly, like, not only the attacks that come down, but also the uniqueness of his attacks as well, like the eat in particular.
Yeah, one thing that I really, really like with this boss is certain bosses, like the Chapter 2 boss. I don't know if Baba Yaga actually has anything. Does the Chapter 3 some bosses have like other moves that they get depending on how many people you have, if you're playing co-op. And this mini boss doesn't have anything for that, but this boss is still balanced in a way where in co-op there's a lot of opportunities to attack multiple enemies at once. I really, really like how this boss is designed. I think the boss fight is really enjoyable every single time. And there's a lot of cool damage windows that they give you in this boss fight for certain characters and with your iframes, like Sun Wukong with 1-inch punch and Stone Monkey and like Divine Palm. When he's doing his stomps, you can like block 1-inch punch in time. And I love the like timing of this boss. I think there's a lot of skill expression in this boss fight.
Yes.
I think he's probably the one of the hardest too. Like he's definitely not one that you can cheese or sneak through. The approach is long. There's a lot of fights in the hallway before you even get to the Cyclops room. And then the Cyclops himself, he's pretty darn tanky. If you try to do that fight early, you're going to have a lot of damage issues, and it's a pretty risky fight to extend because of the AoE like lightning on the ground. I think that one it's going to be really hard to get through those phases without taking damage. And then obviously that he can go and eat the prisoners as well. So if you run into damage issues, you might end up not getting anything out of that fight. So
Yep.
I think it's one of those fights that I will generally save to the very last, and I'm most focused on having a certain build. Like there's some builds where that I'm doing okay, and I know that if I go and try to confront the Cyclops, that I'm just going to bounce off of him.
Yep.
So it's a very knowledge heavy fight. Uh, it's a very like late chapter two if you're scaling really well kind of a fight. But at the same time, I think that in terms of design, it's very interesting. The voice acting for it's fun. The
Hmm.
whole the moveset for the Cyclops is cool. So I think it's really well designed. I think that making it the pinnacle of chapter two before you go into the boss fight itself is actually a really smart design decision. And it's a really, I would say, artistic and well executed one.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's my favorite side quest between the three of, well, the lumping the straw, stone, and wood into one between the three different side quests. It is definitely my favorite amongst all of them. I do also agree that it's kind of like you want to do it as late as possible, especially because even if you don't completely fail the side quests where you lose Sinbad, uh, you do get less XP per prisoner that is killed. It knocks it off a little bit. So if you kill him before he could get any of the prisoners, you get maximum XP, and then it drops off from there. So it's definitely another thing where it's like, yeah, I want to get max XP from this. That is, I want to get as much as possible. So I'm gonna wait to do this, especially because it is a little bit of a time investment as well. So if you're doing it earlier, that means you're investing even more time because you're not as strong, and you might not have properly calculated how long it would take you to do the rest of the stuff on the map. So you can kind of screw yourself in terms of everything else that you want to do. So it's better to just do the other stuff. And if you have time, or if you feel like you're in a good spot later on, then it's a good idea to do that side quest, which I think it functions pretty similarly to the chapter one side quest in that way, where you have to like kind of do it a little later. You have to gauge how much time you have, but yeah, I like the design overall in pretty much every aspect. I do think maybe the design of how long those corridors are, not even the enemies that you have to fight in them, but just how long it takes to walk down those corridors, might rub me the wrong way more than anything about the side quests. Just like, damn, I'm trudging along this long. This is like what my parents said. They had to walk both ways uphill 5 miles to get to school in the morning. Like, this is a long ass walk right here. But other than that, it's like whatever.
Parents don't know the feeling of taking on Cyclops.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
time investment.
Yep,
Yeah, come on, Boomer, like get with it. It's it
exactly.
is it is funny though. I think that in general, we all enjoy fighting the big boss more than we enjoy fighting the random mobs that you
Hmm.
have to trudge through. And I think that there's a lot of trudging right now. I think there's a lot of grinding in hallways for some arbitrary number of crabs or gins or nightmare monsters. Wouldn't mind it if we put more focus around letting the player get into those fights. And I think that some one of the ways that people are kind of getting around this in different chapters is by finding how you can sneak it, sneak chests or sneak other things. You fight all the enemies and then you get into the main room, and then you hit your defense on Scarlet, or uh you hit your defense on Carmilla, and you sneak the chest behind the Ghoul mini boss in chapter one. I I don't like sneaking fundamentally as a player experience. I think sneaking small chests is fine. I think sneaking big mini boss kind of level chess is kind of it's problematic design, and that should not need to be a balance to just no an element of balance to kind of counterweight how many mini mobs you have to fight to even get into that mini boss fight. I think that the mini boss fight should be a little bit of a sacred thing that we all have to fight to get to the item, but that it should be a more accessible thing in general.
You want to go on? We were talking about we have pathing
Yep.
in chapter 2. I think we mentioned a little bit the other time. Pathing in chapter 2 is probably the biggest overall area, and you have to cover the
Yes.
most area. There's certain things in chapter 2, like there's the far off location on the left and the like isolated location on the right. Those, like, sometimes there's more commitment to go into one of those, especially that one in the top left, because it's way out there on its own. And if it's something like a tumor, you just wasted a lot of time going up there. And I think what your towers reveal, basically, like, in the locations that they are, I think honestly is the most important in chapter 2, or like you can get the most value. That's the only chapter where I actually try to play a little bit into towers and what they'll reveal, and like trying to reveal something prior to taking a tower, so I know what's in those 2 locations to see if I have to go there, because you can just save so much time in chapter 2 depending on like what spawns for you.
Yeah, I actually I find the pathing in chapter 2 to be the by far the most satisfying, and overall just learning how to do it the most efficiently has been the most satisfying for me over time. Whether it's okay, let's do all the outside stuff first, go along the big ring on the outside. If depending on when where you start, that can be easier or harder, or to go to the inside, just do a big circle on the inside and then go from wherever when you're done with that. Whichever one is the most efficient, or if it's a little more complex than that, kind of going anywhere where it's most convenient, I suppose, and just going through like that. I think it just has a lot of it lends itself to being very unique in its approach. So I like it a lot.
I don't have the fondest feelings. I feel like I've had a lot of promising builds in chapter 1 that you get to chapter 2 and you take so long that it frustrates me. But it's not I don't know that's exactly bad design. I think it's just some skill expression, some familiarity with the chapter. I think that also there's a lot of times when you're just walking around where you're dealing with birds that kind of gets on my under my skin a little bit. And I don't know that this is as resonant for you two as it is for me, but I think that there are a lot of times, more so than the other chapters, where that I am looking at the map and I need to path a certain way, and I start walking towards where I think a ramp is going to be to go to leave a particular part of Storm Island, and I miss the front of the entrance. This happens to me frequently enough that it may be a UI thing. It might also just be a me thing. But I think that particularly when you're looking at ramps going from the southern side to the northern side, from the center to the top area of the map, that ramp can kind of blend into the wall a little bit. And I'm not sure if it's a real visibility thing or if it's just a me problem, but I've noticed it happen enough that I wanted to call it out here, and we'll have to see if that's just because I'm blind or if there's a pattern there in the community.
For sure, and I've come across it as well, where I thought I was walking towards the proper spot to get to the ramp, but I overshot it or just completely missed it in general. And I think that for me, I feel personally that it's mostly me not paying enough attention, because I'll be focused on oh, there's a phoenix egg right there, or oh, there's a crystal, and I'll be looking at that rather than where the the actual ramp is. But I do sometimes feel like it is kind of easy to miss, more so than most other things in the game. Chapter 1 doesn't have that issue at all. Chapter 3, the corridors are lit up, so it's really easy to see those. So
yeah, I've had that, I think, once it was on stream. And this was specifically, it wasn't the corridors like, or the ramps going from like north to south. It was with camps, because you had mentioned it on camps that sometimes it's difficult to see or to know which camp where the entrance is on them because the geometry on some of them. There's that one camp where there's only an entrance in like the top right and like the direct bottom of it. And I thought it was a camp with an entrance on the left side. And I walked all the way around the left and was very confused on why I couldn't get into this camp. And I was like, oh, there it is. That's what Frebr33ze was talking about. It just happened.
Yeah.
But I haven't fully had that issue. So I'm curious to see the comments on this and see if any other people have had that issue that you're talking about.
It's probably ADHD.
I eat my carrots. It could be that. It could be carrot difference.
Oh, I eat carrots.
Better than mine.
Correlation between carrot eaters and not right here.
That's the real mark of a true Ravenswatch pro. You know, that's it. Once you start like monitoring your carrot intake to make sure that you can see clearly on chapter 2. And I'm just not there yet, guys. And I'm willing to own that if I have to own that. If people want to bail me out in the comments and say, hey, it's something that I deal with as well, some of those things aren't visually quite as, they don't pop as much as I would like, then, you know, I'm more than open to that. But if the judgment passed down by our peers is that Frebr33ze needs to eat more carrots, I accept the burden of that responsibility.
Well, also, if you don't see them, if you're having the same issue, let us know how many carrots you eat.
Yep.
This is a great study. Here's the thing, guys. I have 3 bags of baby carrots in my fridge right now. Like,
okay.
I work quite hard on this, so I feel.
And what's your mouth
like
doing? What's going on?
I mean, I guess that I got sick. I had strep this last week, so I haven't been eating as many baby carrots this last week. But I also haven't been playing as much Ravenswatch. So I think that where I noticed this happening, I was actually doing pretty well on the gamer carrot ratio. So here's the thing, guys. If I might have more, this might be a medical condition. I might have an issue in how I metabolize that prevents carrots from having the full impact on me. If that is the case, then I need you, the community, to let me know that I need to get that looked at, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a doctor who specializes in that, but
I think there's a bug with carrots going on right now for some people that it doesn't actually help and affect their eyesight. I guess I'm lucky I don't have that bug.
That's a patch problem. Someone pushed an update and
Need a hot
didn't make
fix.
sure. Guys, can we fix carrots?
Dude, I also like the idea that I eat carrots because of Ravenswatch.
Yeah. My diet has been affected.
Next time someone asks me, like, how can I get better at Ravenswatch? I'm just going to tell them, like, how many carrots do you eat?
Yeah.
Like, you know, do you track that? How many? It's like your macros, right? It's like your gym time and all that stuff. Like, how many carrots do you eat? When do you eat them? You got to time it right. If you eat them too late, then they're not going to metabolize properly when you're sleeping. So you got to eat them early.
Yeah. I will say, it sounds like from all of our individual anecdotal experiences, it sounds like it happens to you the most, Frebr33ze, missing these ramps. Maybe happens to me less, but kind of still sometimes happens. And then for Ace, it happens almost never. It could be like you have very little carrot, whether consumption or metabolization effect. I might be in the middle of the road in terms of carrot consumption, and then Ace is the Bugs Bunny of the group. So we could have like a little scientific, explanation here for sure.
I mean, I don't know if Ace is just like slamming carrots 24/7, or here's the other possibility: maybe carrots actually actively negatively impact your night vision, and we're just finding out about it now. Maybe that's the case. Maybe Ace eats far less carrots than I do, and that's my problem. Is actually the carrots are having a negative impact on my night visibility.
We just know so little that could also be a glitch. To be honest, you never know.
Okay, well that's too much. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that degree of complexity. So
all right,
just chill a little bit. Chill.
Yeah. All right. Aside from that, the last thing we have on chapter 2 is variability in camp difficulty, which we kind of touched on for chapter 1. But I think personally, getting into a discussion like this, I think the biggest thing for me is the grimoires. And sometimes, and I think I feel this maybe sometimes for the chapter 1 as well, where it feels like the green, the yellow, and the red are maybe not adequately balanced in a similar way to how the Straw Quest has like an absurd amount of enemies, right? And there are like cultists. Cultists can be tanky, especially early game, so that kind of sucks. I feel like sometimes the green, or maybe, yeah, I feel like sometimes the green is like harder than the red. Like if it spawns 4 enemies and there's some nightmare enemies, like the tentacle monster or the worm or whatever that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those can be way easier to tackle, when especially maybe because there's fewer of them compared to when you get like 4 spear throwing gnolls, 4 shielded gnolls, and then 2 club wielding or mace wielding gnolls as well. I think that can be difficult, especially when they're corrupted. Compared to
that's by far the worst of it. The gnolls, because the other green ones are, I don't know if there is a Jin spawn. There might. I think there's a cultist. There is a Jin spawn on green,
I believe.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
there's.
Oh yeah,
there's
yeah. Actually, come to think of it, I agree.
Yeah, it just won't have a purple one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So there's that, and then there's the birds where it just spawns one big bird and a couple of, or a bunch of little birds. Those 2 are far easier than the gnolls, especially because there is 2 gnolls. And yeah, what you're saying, if you get unlucky with one or both those being corrupted, that is something that's the main reason why I don't take it on at level 5, or I try to avoid it unless my build's really, really good. Because I can take on the birds, I can take on the gnolls, but if I'm going to get that, then, it's kind of like if you're a character that, like Pied Piper in Chapter 1, and you roll the ghouls in the Green Grimoire, it's like, oh, well, I made a mistake. I should not have been here.
Yeah.
It's that kind of feeling.
I need to experiment with my starts a little bit, because I have a tendency to just go green, yellow, red without being really critical and analytical. And I mean, there's some camps that I definitely do know to tread cautiously around. So you get a big yellow bird camp, you have, say, 3 birds out and then 2 in eggs. That's a camp that you probably can't take right out in at level 5, or sometimes even level 6. So I think I'm gonna say that I need to experiment a little bit with my starts, because I tend to take that null camp, even though it is a really long fight. If it's a green null camp, I tend to go ahead and do it pretty much automatically, like turn my brain off and go to work. And it's frequently not a very efficient fight. But also, I mean, if I'm playing Scarlet, right, and I have Grandmother's Souvenir, then I'll pop that early, and a lot of my damage happens when I'm in the cloud, so I'm not even really playing the camp at all. So that also affects my perception of it.
Yeah, I will say it does vary greatly. Something that you mentioned with the Cyclops Miniboss earlier, Ace, was Sun Wukong with Stone Monkey and Divine Palm and 1-inch Punch. The gnolls, similar to the Cyclops Stomp, have a similar, like, that swing attack where you can kind of block one hit, block one hit, block one hit, and it's very satisfying. I find Sun Wukong to be one of the easier characters to deal with that. It can be a little much if there's a lot of gnolls and you have the ones throwing the spears and you're like, oh god, I gotta press shift and not move or just spam it while I'm attacking and whatnot, because otherwise I will get pelted. Absolutely, just like I'll become a pincushion to these spear throwers. But I do think it actually is very interesting how different characters have such a different experience with this, like the early parts of Chapter 2 and what camps they can or can't do. And I think the Null camp in particular is very easy for AoE characters to deal with, whereas, like, say, the Jin camp is less easy for the AoE characters, because I believe they have the Jins spread out more and they teleport around, so your AoEs are less effective on them compared to, like, say, Pied Piper. I think is probably one of the easier characters to deal with the Jin camp, because he can single target focus an enemy so easily, especially during nighttime with his power. So I think it actually just really depends on who you're playing and also the build you have in terms of what you can do right off the bat in Chapter 2, which I think is pretty interesting.
One thing I will say about null camps is that you can shave off a couple nulls at a time, which can be helpful to, at least in the camp that has like the 2 levels, right? There's like a recessed upper level and then there's a lower level. You can tend to shave off a couple nulls before you take the main fight. Um, the I personally think I prefer the gen camps usually, not all of the time. And I think that the purple gen has such a high damage possibility, like he can put out so much damage on you,
Yeah.
that gen camps tend that have a purple gen have a really higher possibility or chance to burst you than ones that just have lightning and fire.
Yep.
But I think that getting gen camps for me is usually a good sign because I feel like I can usually kite around the damage and I understand the animations. And then if I take a lot of damage at a gen camp, I usually feel like okay, I deserve that.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes when you're being a little rash about it, you can get hit by like a little off tick of a lightning, or you can be like on the edge of a fire breath from the fire gens, and that can be a little detrimental because that fire, when they're corrupted, it really does a lot of damage. It cooks you a little bit.
The animation's
the
also
ticks,
pretty lenient too. Like
Mhm.
it feels bigger than it looks.
yeah, the ticks on that are pretty quick on the fire.
Yep.
I I'm a little bit on the opposite of Febreze though. I sometimes like a hard gin camp to me normally feels harder than a harder null camp, just because gins I feel like you get so much less space to stand when you have like two or three fire gins doing their thing, and then you have lightning come at you, and then like the homing purple gins. I feel like you just run out of room so quickly, and you just have to like kind of abandon and then come back in those camps pretty often.
Yeah, I think especially in the red areas when you have like two or even maybe three purple gens, that feels like we're truly playing a bullet hell at that point. Uh,
Yeah.
it becomes a little troublesome, especially if you accidentally pull a fourth one from the outside, and you're like, wait, which one to use from the outside? Oh god, I also have to dodge a million projectiles, and oh, there's also like 5 electricity gens. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to do here? What's going on? And they're all teleporting all over the place, and I just use my mellow sign special, and the guy teleported immediately. Like, come on, man, give me a chance.
That sounds like trauma right there. I think I think I'll clarify a little bit. I don't I would say that red gen camps
Oh yeah,
are among the hardest. I feel more so like yellow and green gen camps. Those I feel a little bit more comfortable with, but I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. Like Febreze dies to the red gen camps as often as the next man. I wouldn't hold that over anyone's head. I think that those are really hard camps.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that as well, that when you throw in the purple there, that's when it really like that's when it changes gear. You can have like you can up the amount of base gens in there, like the fire and the electricity, all you want. But when the second you throw an elite gen in there, it's a whole different game at that point. And sometimes it depends on the build, for sure. But sometimes you can kind of like knock them out real quick and that's satisfying. Maybe like you're playing Wolf or Scarlet and you have Wolf with the eat. You can just like get them out because I don't think they give too much XP compared to a lot of other elites or stronger enemies like crabs or phoenix eggs, for example. And so losing the XP when you use the eat, I think it's one of the more ideal targets to hit the elite Jin with an eat personally whenever I'm playing that build. So
Yeah, one of us should really do a video on XP because
oh
I
yeah.
think that I don't I've been meaning that's one of those things that I'm like, oh, that would be cool to get into. I mean,
Hmm.
there's so many mechanics like that. The stagger in the game is one of those things that would be nice to have more detail on. The XP for all of the different enemies would be interesting to analyze a little bit, see how it varies by chapter. That's one
Yeah.
of those areas that I would love to get into. And you know what? There's just so much to cover about the game in general, but I'd love to break that around up for people.
Yeah, especially I don't know how easily this data is to come by, but like XP to enemy health ratio, like if tankier enemies are necessarily like the ones that giving you more XP, for example. My favorite enemies in general are trees and crabs, just because of the XP that they give. I think crabs are a little less efficient because of their armor, but trees are just so nice to kill because they give I think like 60 for the little guys, and they're not armored or anything like that. They're really easy to take down, so it's like free XP in my mind. Same with I know the Phoenix eggs, they give 191. I've internalized that. So that's a really good number as well to get. Just like
I didn't pay attention to XP really with enemies until watching some of your videos, and you were like, "Hey, I'm gonna go kill these enemies. It's good XP." And I'm like, "Is it really that different from other enemies?" And I started paying attention to some. I'm like, "Oh wow, that's actually it's very worth it there."
oh yeah, like sometimes I'll see a group of trees in chapter 1, and it's like, you know what, this is worth doing a little sidetrack just to get like a little tick up on my level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end of our discussion. It kind of ended abruptly because we got a little sidetracked with other stuff and immediately moved on to a little break and then right into chapter 3, which you can find on Frebr33ze's channel once he finishes the video. So anyways, I want to thank you all for watching. I'd also like to give a shout out to my channel members real quick. Thanks for supporting me. Shout out to Jiggy. He was one of the first people to support me with a channel membership. Also James, another sort of OG. We have friend of the channel, OatTunes. And then Owen and Cranium Hunter, who are the newest additions. So big thanks to all of you. If you guys want to support me in that way, you can check the members tab. I have 3 different tiers, and the lowest one is pretty cheap. So everything counts. Otherwise, if you haven't subscribed and liked the video, go ahead and do that. It means a lot. So yeah. Thanks for watching the video, and hope to see you next time. Bye.